The spring rain fell steadily over the Montana wilderness, turning dirt roads into muddy streams. At the Wild Sky Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, located on the outskirts of Bozeman, Sarah Winters was finishing her paperwork when her phone rang. It was already past 8 p.m., and she had been hoping to head home early after 3 straight days of 16-hour shifts. "Wild Sky, this is Sarah," she answered, stifling a yawn. "I've got a wounded bobcat," a gruff voice replied. "Found it near my property line. It's got a bad leg and doesn't look good." Sarah straightened in her chair. "Where are you now?" "About 20 minutes out. Name's Jack Reeves. I've got it wrapped in a blanket in my truck." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline that pushed away her fatigue. "Drive carefully. I'll get the intake room ready." She hung up and immediately called her colleague, Miguel Ortiz, the center's veterinarian who lived in a cabin on the property. "We've got an injured bobcat coming in," she explained. "Can you meet me at intake?" Within 15 minutes, Sarah and Miguel had prepared the examination room. The center specialized in wildlife rehabilitation, taking in everything from orphaned fox kits to injured eagles, but bobcats were relatively rare admissions. The headlights of a mud-splattered pickup truck swept across the window as Jack pulled up. Sarah grabbed a raincoat and stepped outside. The rain had intensified, drumming against the metal roof of the facility. Jack Reeves was a weathered man in his 60s, with deep lines etched into his face from years in the Montana sun. He approached carefully, cradling a bundle wrapped in an old wool blanket. "It hasn't moved much since I found it," he said, water dripping from his hat. "I was checking my fence line when I spotted it dragging itself through the brush." Sarah led him inside, where Miguel waited with gloves and a prepared kennel. "Let's see what we've got," Miguel said, helping Jack place the bundle on the examination table. Carefully, they unwrapped the blanket. The bobcat was smaller than Sarah had expected, likely a young female. Its tawny fur was matted with mud and what appeared to be blood. One of its hind legs was visibly swollen, and the animal's amber eyes were half closed in pain. Yet despite its weakened state, the wildcat managed a low, warning growl. "Easy now," Sarah whispered, allowing the animal to register her presence without feeling threatened. Miguel prepared a mild sedative. "Let's get her comfortable so we can assess the damage." As the sedative took effect, the bobcat's eyes locked with Sarah's. There was something in that gaze, not just fear or pain, but a depth that caught Sarah off guard. She'd worked with hundreds of wild animals, but something about this bobcat's penetrating stare felt different, as if it were trying to communicate. "She's got a severe laceration on the right hind leg," Miguel reported after his initial examination. "Possibly from a trap. There's infection setting in, and she's dehydrated. I'm also concerned about internal injuries." Jack Reeves shifted uncomfortably. "Will she make it?" Miguel exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Hard to say. The next 48 hours will be critical." After Jack left, promising to check back, Sarah and Miguel worked for nearly 2 hours, cleaning the wound, administering antibiotics, and setting up an IV drip for fluids. X-rays revealed no broken bones, but the muscle damage was extensive. "I'm naming her Maple," Sarah decided, as they moved the sedated bobcat to a recovery kennel. "For her coat color." Miguel smiled tiredly. "Let's hope Maple has the will to fight." As they dimmed the lights for the night, Sarah looked back at the sleeping wildcat. In the soft glow of the monitoring equipment, Maple's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Something about this animal had touched her. Perhaps it was the way those amber eyes had seemed to plead for help, or maybe it was simply that Sarah recognized in the bobcat a fierce determination to survive despite the odds. Either way, Sarah knew she wouldn't be getting much sleep tonight. 3 days passed, and Maple clung to life with unexpected tenacity. The infection in her leg was responding to the antibiotics, but she refused to eat voluntarily. Sarah had to tube feed her, a risky procedure with any wild predator, even in a weakened state. "She's looking at me again," Sarah told Miguel during their morning rounds. "Really looking, you know, not just seeing, observing." Miguel checked Maple's vitals. "Cognitive assessment seems normal. Pupils are responsive. She's alert, which is a good sign." "It's more than that," Sarah insisted. "When I sit with her, it's like She's trying to figure me out. The rehabilitation center was at capacity, with spring bringing an influx of orphaned and injured wildlife. Between a family of raccoons, 2 young black bears who had lost their mother to a car accident, and several birds of prey with wing injuries, the staff was stretched thin. Yet Sarah found herself spending extra time with Maple, talking softly to the Bobcat during feeding times, explaining the procedures as she changed bandages. By the end of the first week, Maple was eating small amounts of food on her own, a critical milestone in her recovery. Sarah had moved her from the intensive care unit to a larger recovery enclosure with minimal stimulation, as stress could significantly impede healing in wild animals. On the 10th day, during a particularly heavy Montana thunderstorm, Sarah was working late, cataloging medical supplies, when she heard a disturbance from Maple's enclosure. Grabbing a flashlight, she hurried down the corridor. Maple was pressed against the back of her enclosure, eyes wide, ears flattened against her head. The thunder had clearly triggered her fight-or-flight response, and in her confined space, flight wasn't an option. "Hey there," Sarah said softly, keeping her distance from the kennel door. "It's just noise. You're safe here." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. Maple made a sound somewhere between a hiss and a whimper. Sarah hesitated, then pulled up a chair and sat beside the enclosure, not too close, but within Maple's line of sight. She began to speak in a low, steady voice, not about anything in particular, just the mundane details of her day, the weather, the other animals at the center. Gradually, Maple's posture changed. Her ears moved forward, her breathing slowed. Those amber eyes fixed on Sarah with that same penetrating gaze. "You understand more than you let on, don't you?" Sarah whispered. As if in response, Maple blinked slowly, a gesture that in domestic cats often signaled trust. Sarah knew better than to anthropomorphize a wild animal, but in that moment she felt a connection that transcended the usual caretaker-patient relationship. The next morning, Jack Reeves returned to check on the Bobcat he had rescued. "Well, look at that," he said, observing Maple from a safe distance. "She's got some fight in her. She's making remarkable progress," Sarah agreed. "The wound is healing cleanly now, and she's eating on her own." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Where I found her, it's near a property that was recently bought by some developer from California. They've been clearing land, setting up all sorts of barriers. Wouldn't surprise me if they put out traps too, legal or not." Sarah frowned. "We've been seeing more wildlife displacement because of that development. The new access road cuts right through a traditional migration corridor. Nature always pays the price for progress, doesn't it?" Jack sighed. "So what happens to her when she's healed up?" "Ideally, we'll release her back into the wild, but not too close to that development. She needs a territory with adequate prey and minimal human interaction." As they talked, Maple watched them, her gaze shifting between Sarah and Jack, as if following their conversation. When Jack approached the enclosure for a closer look, she tensed visibly. "She remembers you," Sarah noted, "but she's not sure if that's good or bad." "Smart girl," Jack chuckled. "Caution keeps her kind alive." That afternoon, Miguel performed another examination on Maple. The news was encouraging. The infection was gone, and the wound was healing well, though there would likely be permanent muscle damage, resulting in a slight limp. "She won't be as fast as she once was," Miguel explained, "but bobcats are adaptable. She can still hunt smaller prey effectively." "So we're looking at release soon?" Sarah asked, feeling a surprising twinge of reluctance. "Not quite yet. I want to see more improvement in her mobility first. We'll need to move her to the outdoor rehabilitation enclosure for at least 2 weeks to monitor her hunting skills and ensure she's fit for survival." The transfer to the outdoor enclosure was scheduled for the following day. That night, Sarah found herself returning to Maple's enclosure after hours. The bobcat was awake, sitting upright with her injured leg carefully positioned. "Tomorrow's a big day," Sarah told her. "You're moving to better accommodations, more space, more natural environment. It's one step closer to going home." Maple tilted her head slightly, those unblinking eyes fixed on Sarah's face. "I know you want to be free," Sarah continued. "I can see it every time you look at me. That wildness, it's still there. still strong. For a fleeting moment, Sarah imagined she could read the emotions behind those amber eyes: impatience, determination, and perhaps, though Sarah knew this was her own projection, a hint of gratitude. The outdoor rehabilitation enclosure was designed to mimic a natural habitat as closely as possible within the constraints of a controlled environment. It featured natural vegetation, rocks for climbing, hollow logs for shelter, and a carefully designed system for introducing live prey to help recovering predators hone their hunting skills. Maple's transfer went smoothly, though she retreated immediately to the farthest corner of the enclosure beneath a dense thicket that offered concealment. For the first 2 days, she barely emerged, even for feeding. "This is normal," Miguel assured Sarah, who had been watching the enclosure's surveillance monitors with concern. "She's adjusting. The increased space and stimuli can be overwhelming at first." By the 3rd day, Maple began to explore her new surroundings, moving with increasing confidence, despite her lingering limp. The surveillance footage showed her climbing on lower rocks, testing her injured leg, and becoming more active during dawn and dusk hours. Natural hunting times for bobcats. The first live prey test was scheduled for day 5. Several mice released into the enclosure to assess Maple's hunting instincts and physical capabilities. Sarah and Miguel watched from the observation blind as Maple immediately detected the presence of prey. Her entire demeanor changed, body lowered, ears forward, movements deliberate and silent. Despite her injury, she successfully caught 2 mice within minutes, her technique slightly adapted to compensate for her weaker hind leg. "That's encouraging," Miguel noted, recording his observations. "She's already developing adaptive strategies." Over the next 2 weeks, Maple continued to improve. Her coat regained its luster, her movements became more fluid, and while the limp remained, it didn't significantly impair her functionality. She successfully hunted increasingly challenging prey, demonstrating that she could sustain herself in the wild. Sarah found herself visiting the observation blind daily, often staying longer than necessary. She watched as Maple navigated her surroundings with growing confidence, each day more wildcat and less patient. "We're looking at release next week," Miguel informed her after their final assessment. "All indicators are positive. She's ready." Sarah nodded, feeling that same unexpected twinge of sadness. "I'll coordinate with Fish and Wildlife about the release location. We need somewhere far from that development, but still within the general region she came from." Jack Reeves offered a solution. "I've got a cousin with a 300-acre parcel that borders national forest land, about 40 miles from where I found her, but it's good bobcat territory. Plenty of rabbits, squirrels, good cover. No developments planned anywhere nearby." The release date was set for the following Tuesday. The day before, Sarah found herself at the observation blind again, watching Maple in the fading Montana sunset. The bobcat was perched on a rock, surveying her surroundings with that intense focus that had first captivated Sarah. "Tomorrow you go home," Sarah whispered, though Maple was too far away to hear. "Back to where you belong." As if sensing she was being watched, Maple suddenly turned her head, looking directly at the observation blind, directly at Sarah. For several long moments, those amber eyes seemed to pierce right through the one-way glass. Then deliberately, Maple blinked slowly before turning away. The release team consisted of Sarah, Miguel, Jack Reeves, and a representative from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. They transported Maple in a secure carrier to the location Jack had suggested, a beautiful stretch of mixed forest and meadow that backed up to thousands of acres of protected wilderness. It was a clear, crisp morning, the kind that made Montana's nickname of Big Sky Country seem particularly apt. They positioned the carrier facing the forest edge, door aligned with a natural game trail. "Everyone step back," the wildlife officer instructed. "Give her plenty of space." Sarah was designated to open the carrier door using a long rope mechanism that would allow her to release Maple from a distance. Before taking her position, she knelt beside the carrier for one last moment. "Be wild," she whispered. "Be free." Those amber eyes met hers one final time through the carrier grate. Alert, intense, alive, with wild purpose. Sarah moved back, and took her position with the release rope. At the signal from Miguel, she pulled, and the carrier door swung open. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, Maple emerged. She paused at the threshold, scanning her new surroundings, nose testing the air. The morning sunlight caught her tawny coat, making it glow almost golden. She took a few steps forward, her slight limp barely noticeable now. Then she stopped and turned, looking back at the small group of humans who had brought her to this place. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, Maple's gaze found Sarah's across the distance between them. In that silent exchange, Sarah felt something pass between them. Not gratitude, not affection, but a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement from one living being to another. Then Maple turned and moved toward the forest with purpose, her pace quickening as she went. At the edge of the trees, she paused once more, silhouetted against the deep green of the pines. Then, with a fluid movement that spoke of wild grace and hard-won healing, she disappeared into the shadows of her true home. "There she goes," Jack said quietly. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected. "There she goes." As they packed up their equipment, the wildlife officer approached Sarah. "You folks did good work with that one. Not all of them make it back." "She was special," Sarah said simply. On the drive back to the center, Sarah was unusually quiet. Miguel glanced at her with understanding. "The successful releases are always bittersweet," he said. "But that's the point of what we do, to make ourselves unnecessary." Sarah nodded. "I know. It's just, there was something about her eyes, like she understood everything." "Maybe she did, in her own way," Miguel suggested. That evening, as sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah stood on the porch of the rehabilitation center. Somewhere out there, Maple was exploring her new territory, hunting, being exactly what she was meant to be, a wild creature, free and unbound. Sarah thought about those eyes that had seemed to speak volumes without a sound, and she smiled. Some connections defied explanation, crossing the boundaries between species, between wild and tamed. Not all communication required words, and not all healing was physical. In her mind's eye, she could still see Maple's final look back, that moment of connection before the Bobcat returned to the wilderness. It was enough. It had to be. A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, and Sarah made a silent wish for Maple, for safety, for plenty of prey, for a long wild life lived according to her own nature. As the first stars appeared, Sarah turned to go inside, carrying with her the memory of amber eyes that had spoken directly to her soul.